You heard our conversation yesterday, right? My eldest son and his wife are coming back home for the birth of their child. So I need you to move your stuff out to the yard. Excuse me? You can't have kids anyway. You don't help with my son's work, so the least you could do is make some room. But I'm paying $20,000 in rent. This is getting too tiring to deal with. I live with my mother-in-law, but now she wants me out of the house because my brother-in-law and his wife are returning. My mother-in-law, brother-in-law, his wife, and my husband. This house is full of problems. I've been trying to keep things running smoothly, but it's becoming a hassle to think about it all. I'm done thinking. Okay, I'll leave, but I can't just put my belongings in the yard. I'll come back later to pick them up. You're leaving? Thank you, that's a big help, my mother-in-law said, ignoring my pleas. I started packing my things and left the house. 7 seconds after stepping out the door, I took out my phone and called a junk removal service. Once I stopped thinking, no one could stop my actions. I'm Rachel, a 43-year-old IT consultant. My husband, Eric, is also 43 and runs 4 restaurants. We're both 43, and people often assume we've been married a long time and have a kid or two, but we're actually newlyweds. We both lived as workaholics and didn't marry until this age. I had given up on marriage just before turning 43, but a random visit to a bar after work changed my mind. Is this your first time here? He asked. Yes, that's right. I had been curious about it for a while, but it was hard for me to go in alone because the place is so stylish. But I worked hard today, so I decided to go in as a reward to myself. I was relieved to find a counter where it was easy for a loner to spend time. We have many women who come alone, so feel free to visit anytime. My husband Eric chatted with me with a smile. I sat at the end of the bar. I knew he was just trying to attract a new customer, but for someone like me who had no friends to eat with at this age, even this kind of service felt nice. Feeling comfortable in Eric's restaurant, I started visiting often. I always sat at the end of the bar, and it became normal for Eric to chat with me while I ate. What does an IT consultant do? He asked. I introduce it to companies and do strategic planning. I've worked with restaurants too. Once I suggested a tablet-based ordering system to reduce labor costs and improve efficiency. Oh, the system that's become common? How much does that cost? For a place like this, it would cost about this much, I said, punching numbers into my phone calculator and showing him the screen. No way, that's too much for a small business like mine. Eric shook his head and hands vigorously. Eric was curious and always eager to learn from our conversations. He looked for ways to apply new knowledge to his work. Even though it seemed like just a pleasant conversation, I was slowly drawn to his dedication. Likewise, Eric grew fond of me, seeing that I was hardworking. I'm always busy with work and can't talk much. How about we go out for dinner sometime? Excited about the chance to dine with a restaurateur, I eagerly agreed. I was thrilled to be asked out, but saying something so girlish at nearly 43 would be embarrassing, so let's just leave it at that. My husband didn't just ask me out that one day. He continued to invite me out for meals occasionally. It's natural for adult men and women who frequently dine together to develop a romantic relationship. We started dating, and 3 years later, as we both turned 43, we decided to get married. Feeling shy about being a bride at 43, I asked my husband to skip the wedding ceremony. We just took some photos of us dressed up. After we got married, I moved from my apartment to my husband's house. His house is a 4-story building with a garden and parking, located in a high-end area. The rent is apparently around $2,000. My husband was living there with his mother. Some might think it's unthinkable to live with a mother-in-law right after getting married, but I'm 43, so I didn't mind much. Plus, my mother-in-law is 71, and my father-in-law has passed away, so living together seemed necessary. When my husband suggested living with his mother, I immediately said it was okay. But after starting to live with my mother-in-law, I regretted accepting so quickly. When I moved into my husband's house, besides the bedroom for us, I even got a nice office room for myself. His house seemed too big for just 2 people, with many spare rooms. Once I settled in, I asked my husband, "Why do we need such a big house just for you and your mother?" He replied, "I have a brother 4 years older than me. He left home after college, and we've mostly lost touch. He hasn't been home at all, and it's been a few years since I've heard from him. He's been moving from job to job and place to place. He's the kind of man who might get into trouble and come back to me and Mom. So we decided to rent a bigger house. I think it's a little too big, but now that I'm married and you moved in, I guess it all worked out." While unboxing my books and arranging them on the shelf, my husband talked about his brother Stephen with a smile. It seems Stephen is aimlessly hopping from job to job, but my husband doesn't think badly of him. "Don't talk about that kid. What if he really comes back?" My mother-in-law appeared at the doorway of what would be my office, seemingly checking on us. It appears she doesn't have a good opinion of him, unlike my husband. It's understandable for a mother to be cold towards an eldest son who shirks his responsibilities. However, I'm worried that my husband and my mother-in-law might clash over his brother someday. Also, I'm not too fond of you either, Mom. Come on, we're going to live together now, so stop saying things like that. I'm not saying you should leave. I just need to make things clear from the start, my mother-in-law said as she walked away, her slippers making a padding sound. "I'm sorry, I'll talk to her," my husband said. "It's okay. I got a similar talk when we met for the wedding. I'll build a relationship with your mother as we live together," I replied, taking a book from my husband's paused hands and placing it on the shelf. "It seems she doesn't like my age. I'm 43, so it's not impossible to have children, but I guess it's a challenging thought. Also, Eric's elder brother Stephen is not married and has no children, so there's a high chance that my mother-in-law won't get to see her grandchildren. That's why she's disappointed and wishes Eric had married someone younger. To her, Stephen, who doesn't fulfill his role as the eldest son, and I, who can't fulfill my role as a wife in her eyes, are probably the same. I understand her feelings, but I can't change my age." Once the move was finished and our married life began, my mother-in-law's coldness towards me became clear. She ignored me when I spoke and tried to avoid me. It's a bit lonely, but since there's no harassment or physical violence, I guess it's okay for now. I could build a relationship with her over time. My bigger concern is Eric. "Are you okay with your work?" I asked. "No, it's pretty bad. I need to take action soon, but it's tough to arrange the finances," Eric said, sitting at the dining table with his head in his hands. I stopped doing the dishes and sat down in front of him to listen. These are tough times. Prices are soaring, expenses are climbing, and customers are tightening their wallets. There's no end in sight. "If this keeps up, I might have to close another one of our stores," he continued. About a year into our marriage, the situation at Eric's restaurants worsened. One of the 4 stores had already closed, and it seemed another might have to shut down too. Seeing Eric's troubled face made me feel distressed, but my mother-in-law seemed unaffected by these troubles. "You're Eric's wife, but you don't help out at the store. You just do your own job. Can you really say you're fulfilling your role as a wife?" My mother-in-law overheard our conversation and hurled insults at me from her seat on the sofa. I wondered what she was thinking, but she has her own perspective. Eric has been running his own restaurant for nearly 12 years, overcoming various challenges. I believe he'll pull through this time too. You, his wife, shouldn't be making that face. Are you trying to feed into his anxiety and make him fail? "What a terrible wife!" she shouted again from the living room to the dining room. Her words were filled with spite and venom. I knew she wasn't just trying to fire me up, but she wasn't entirely wrong. I took her words positively and decided to support Eric to the fullest, smiling reassuringly at my anxious husband. A year later, just as she said, Eric managed to turn the situation around and avoided closing the second store. See, I told you. A stupid wife who can't even trust her husband. Don't drag Eric down, she said. As a side effect, my mother-in-law, who had previously ignored me, started lashing out at me without reservation. The relationship with her might seem to have worsened, but since Eric's business is doing well, I'll consider it a break-even situation. I thought things were balancing out, but it turned out worse for me. Eric, having stabilized the business and with a bit more money, seemed to get carried away, and I heard rumors about his affair. What is he thinking? If there's extra money, there are surely better ways to spend it. Also, it's strange how bad situations tend to pile up. Having seen Eric's business revenue drop, I know this all too well, but I never thought it would happen to me. Eric, Stephen called. His girlfriend is pregnant. That's great news. She's a 33-year-old who worked at the same bar as Eric. They asked something. What? You're being so formal all of a sudden. Stephen is a freelancer, and so is his pregnant girlfriend. With a baby on the way, they're struggling. They asked if they could move into this house and if they could work at your restaurant. I was thinking about how to confront Eric about the affair when my mother-in-law came into the living room and started talking to him. The conversation was about Stephen, whom I've never met, and I was completely left out as they continued talking. It was a strange scene. She used to dislike Stephen for not fulfilling his role as the eldest son, yet now she was asking Eric to welcome him. The reason was simple, the grandchild. She had given up hope of seeing a grandchild, but now saw an opportunity and completely changed her stance. She was even planning to offer them a home and jobs. Eric, who never thought badly of Stephen, had rented this big house for such a time, but the situation has changed, and now I'm here. Isn't it odd to have Stephen and his family move in? I looked at Eric in the living room from the dining area. He was looking back at me with a clearly troubled expression. Come on, it's a good thing. Stephen is in trouble, and you, Eric, have the means to help him. Ah, okay, I got it. Eric sighed, unable to say no to his mother. I had hoped he would stand up to her, but it seems it was just wishful thinking. He kept glancing at me, probably worried about my reaction. The worsening relationship with my mother-in-law, Eric's affair, now living with Stephen and his family, the problems just keep piling up. Overwhelmed and not knowing where to start, I decided to abandon thinking for today and just go to sleep. The next day was a holiday, and probably due to extreme mental fatigue. I slept in until late morning. Eric was at work, so it was just my mother-in-law and me at home. Dreading what she might say about my sleeping in, I reluctantly headed to the living room. You sure slept in. Must be nice to have such leisure, she said. Bracing myself for her usual nagging about not fulfilling my duties as a wife, I tensed up, ready for her words. However, what she said was much worse than I expected. You heard Eric and me talking yesterday, right? Stephen and his wife are coming back for a maternity leave visit, so move your stuff out to the yard. Excuse me, was I still groggy from sleep? Did she really mean I should live in the yard, or was she telling me to leave the house? You can't have kids anyway, and you don't help with Eric's work, so you should at least make room for Stephen and his family. We have 2 spare rooms left, so if you leave and your office is free, we can have a bedroom and a nursery for Stephen's family and a storage room for their stuff. Don't you think the room count and usage are just perfect? It seemed she was indeed telling me to leave. A storage room for Stephen's family. I'm being kicked out to make room for something that doesn't even seem necessary. Originally, I was allowed to use the office because there were spare rooms. I don't mind losing the office. A bedroom for Eric and me is enough. Stephen's family can live here without me leaving. Realizing that my mother-in-law now sees no reason for me to be in this house as a wife, since she can see her grandchild, I thought about the $20,000 I was paying in rent. I'm too tired to deal with all this. I decided to clear my mind and rest. Silent with my mother-in-law, the only sound in the living room was the ticking of the clock. Okay, time to leave. After resting my mind, I decided it was too much trouble to worry about what happens to Eric, my mother-in-law, Stephen's family, and their future. I chose to leave the house. Understood. I'll leave. I can't put all my belongings in the yard, so I'll come back later to pick them up. You're leaving? Thank you, that helps, my mother-in-law said, pleased. Ignoring her, I started packing my things and left the house. 7 seconds after stepping out the door, I took out my phone and called a junk removal service. My decision made after stopping my overthinking couldn't be stopped by anyone. Let them all regret this choice later. I left the house. I decided to stay at a hotel for a while. I had called the junk removal service, but they needed some time to prepare. This worked out since I wanted some time too. 3 weeks after leaving, I rented an apartment and started living alone. I haven't heard from Eric since then. He probably thinks I'll come back eventually. The thought of Eric taking the current situation lightly infuriates me. However, today is the day after his restaurant's day off. I expect a call from Eric when he visits the restaurant for lunch prep. Hey, what's going on here? The restaurant is completely empty, just as I thought, Eric called. I could explain over the phone, but it would be more efficient if your mom was there too. I'm heading to the house now. Can you come back? You can't open the restaurant anyway, right? I couldn't help but laugh before hanging up, amused by Eric's reaction. He must be quite shocked. Still chuckling, I started getting ready to leave. When I arrived at the house, my mother-in-law started yelling at me. What on earth is this? The restaurant's fridge, cooking equipment, tables, all the important stuff is gone. You did this, didn't you? Do you think you can get away with this for free? It seems Eric had explained half of the situation. There was an unfamiliar couple in the living room, apparently Stephen and his wife. They looked confused and anxious, not fully grasping the situation and my mother-in-law's extreme anger. Why would you do such a thing? The restaurant can't operate now, my mother-in-law screamed. It's my restaurant, so there shouldn't be a problem with me starting the closing process or having the items I bought disposed of by a junk removal service, right? I replied. Huh? Your restaurant? What are you talking about? My mother-in-law asked. Why don't you explain, Eric? You haven't told your mom, have you? You remember that I still have the main restaurant and the second branch, and the second one was in a financial crisis, right? Yes, of course. You worked hard to turn it around, changing the tables, chairs, signboard, the restaurant's atmosphere, bringing in new cooking equipment, expanding the menu, and replacing the fridge and freezer to accommodate the new menu, right? Well, about that, Rachel actually paid for those expenses. What? What do you mean? Hearing Eric's words, my mother-in-law looked perplexed. She seemed to be trying hard to understand, but probably lacked the full information to grasp everything. Eric continued looking uncomfortable, like he was holding back from saying more, but it was clear this was going nowhere. I decided to explain everything. Before turning 43, I was single and working in IT consulting. We didn't have a wedding ceremony, nor did we buy a new house after getting married, so I had saved up quite a bit of money. I lent Eric $400,000 to help turn around his struggling second restaurant branch. $400,000, but you can't just hand over such a large amount of money to your spouse, right? That's why I decided to buy the rights to the second branch and become its owner. I left most of the management to Eric, so there wasn't much for me to do as the owner. The only change was that Eric shifted his focus from the main branch to the second one for its recovery. When Eric's restaurant was in crisis, I showed my concern alongside him. It was when my mother-in-law yelled at me for not showing enough trust in my husband that I decided to support Eric to the fullest. My form of support was giving him the money I had saved during my single years. Eric, is this true? She asked. Yeah, it's true. She said it was okay if I failed and wasted the $400,000. She gave me the money, but since it was such a large amount, if it was going to fail anyway, she suggested becoming the owner. The plan was to pay back the borrowed $400,000 from the restaurant's earnings, but it was simpler for Rachel to become the owner and have the restaurant's income go directly to her. It also meant that she could decide whether to close the restaurant or not. It's a lie. Can something like that really happen? My mother-in-law exclaimed. I understand it's hard to believe hearing this all of a sudden. That's why I brought some evidence. I spread documents like the business license, transfer of rights agreement, and lease agreement on the table, proving that I was the owner of the restaurant. My mother-in-law's face turned red as she confirmed my name on those documents. Why didn't you say anything about this? You always talked about how you believed in Eric and how the restaurant was recovering, right? Even before we got married, you always encouraged Eric like that. He felt pressured by your words, but tried to live up to your expectations, not wanting to disappoint you as the head of the household. You're pretty cold to people like me and Steven who don't fulfill their roles, right? That's why Eric couldn't tell you he borrowed a large sum of money from me. He could have just told me, she protested. That's why Eric couldn't speak his mind, because she gets upset easily. People like my mother-in-law often don't realize they're putting pressure on others. They might think it's just a small thing to say, but for the one under pressure, it's a huge burden, not something they can easily talk about. And even if they did speak up, she would likely be disappointed and start complaining. It was essential not to let Eric's spirit break under her constant jabs, especially when the restaurant was finally turning around. That's why I kept quiet too. But I really wished she had refused when Steven and his family were coming back. Probably Eric thought it was work-related and agreed without thinking much. Mom, Rachel, I'm sorry. This situation is my fault for not being decisive enough. If I had managed the restaurant well from the start, Rachel wouldn't have had to lend her money. And if I wasn't so weak, I could have told you the truth. If Rachel decides to close the restaurant, then that's it. But what about the part-time workers? My mother-in-law asked. Don't worry. In the past 3 weeks, I've already informed everyone about closing the restaurant, and they all understood. For those interested, I've arranged part-time work at other restaurants through my IT consulting contacts. That's a relief. That was my only concern. So everyone was in on this. Rachel showing me an empty restaurant as a surprise, and everyone keeping the closure from me? Eric, I'm sorry too. I've been pressuring you. And Rachel, I'm sorry for everything up to now. I won't tell you to leave again. My mother-in-law apologized, and it seemed as if everything was resolving nicely. But that's a misunderstanding. I'm far from being satisfied, and the discussion is far from over. Let's settle this matter next. What's this? Divorce papers. When I placed the divorce papers on the table, Eric picked them up in shock. What does this mean? Why a divorce? This is supposed to be a reconciliation, right? Don't just assume we've reconciled. You might think it's a secret, but I know about your affair with the part-timer. All the part-time workers knew about it too. That's just a rumor. You can't say things like that without proof. I displayed an image on my smartphone that a part-time worker had sent me and placed it on the table amidst the scattered documents. This is a photo of you entering a hotel. It was taken by one of the part-timers. If you leave the restaurant together and walk towards the nearby hotel district, anyone can take such evidence, not just the police or detectives. Did getting the second branch back on track give you too much confidence? You really got carried away as the owner of the restaurant. I couldn't do much in the day-to-day operations, but I still visited the restaurant from time to time. That's when the part-time workers told me about Eric's affair and asked for my help. When I promised to handle it, they provided incredible support. They sent me proof and even kept the closure of the restaurant a secret from him. Wait a minute, closing the second branch in a divorce? What's going to happen to the rent for this place? Eric asked. The rent for this place? What do you mean? My mother-in-law asked. I haven't mentioned that yet. I've been paying the entire rent of $20,000 a month for this house, I said. Is that also true? She asked Eric. It's true. When the restaurant's revenue started falling, Rachel started paying half of it. But as revenue continued to drop, the amount she had to cover increased. Eventually, she ended up paying it all. $20,000 a month is the same as my salary, so I paid all the rent, and Eric covered other living expenses like food and utilities. So if Eric gets divorced and only has the main restaurant left, obviously living here won't be an option anymore. Eric and my mother-in-law seemed deflated after hearing my words. They slumped as if they had exhausted themselves in a boxing match. Stephen and his wife, now somewhat understanding the situation, hesitantly joined the conversation. What does that mean? We came back here and can't live here? Stephen asked. Wait, Stephen, this is different from what we heard. We thought everything would be fine once we got back home, his wife said. Sorry, Stephen. Right now, I don't have the means to help you with a restaurant or a house. Come on, do something. We're having a baby. At least give me a job. We have enough part-timers. In fact, we need to cut down on staff costs. Eric will work hard, so just wait a bit longer. That's what I'm talking about. Stop saying things like that. Hey, what about my house and job now? Stephen shouted. Eric, my mother-in-law, and Stephen started arguing about their future lives. Stephen's wife, whose name I still didn't know, looked uncomfortably out of place. I had delivered the news about the restaurant's closure and the divorce, so my business here was done. I was tired of constantly trying to smooth things over with Eric and his family, and I refused to live with Stephen and his wife. I didn't care what happened to this house next. They could discuss it amongst themselves. I left the house amidst their shouting. After that, having evidence of the affair, I was able to divorce Eric smoothly. I could have demanded alimony for the affair, but I had a job and didn't need the money. I wanted as little to do with my ex-husband and his family as possible, so I didn't ask for any compensation after our divorce. My ex-husband, Eric, couldn't afford the rent and had to leave the house with his whole family. Financially and emotionally strained, Eric, who had been taking care of his mother, argued that it was actually Stephen's responsibility as the eldest son. But Stephen, who came back without any money, couldn't take care of her. This led to an ugly fight between the brothers about who should take care of their mother. In the end, with no income, Eric had to take her in, but this fight ruined the relationship between the brothers. As a result, Stephen and his wife disappeared again, cutting off all contact. Witnessing the brothers' dispute over her, the mother-child relationship also deteriorated. Now, Eric and his mother are living together reluctantly in a smaller apartment. It's not as spacious as the previous house, and they have to see each other all the time, but they hardly talk, creating an awkward atmosphere in the house. My actions, prompted by thinking ahead, resulted in the breakdown of a family relationship. After the divorce, I first dealt with closing down the restaurant. It was a bit of a hassle, but as the owner, it was my responsibility. However, the fridge, cooking equipment, tables, and chairs I had removed were fairly new, so I managed to sell them at a good price. Adding just a little more money allowed me to finish the restaurant's closure. Though it was a brief period, being a restaurant owner and handling its closure was an experience. I believe these experiences will be useful in my IT consulting work someday. I guess work suits me better than marriage. Convinced of this, I continue to work hard today.